Hello and welcome back to Learning to Make Games in Unity, Episode 2, focusing on game objects and materials. First off, I left you on the last video with an exercise on manipulating the Unity layout, and let's quickly go through how to do it. I asked you to make 4 folders called Scripts, Art, Scenes, and Prefabs. I realize now that prefabs is most likely a complete mystery to you, and that's my fault, but we'll discuss them later. For now, we can right-click on the project panel and choose Make New Folder. Name this one Scripts, and then continue with the remaining ones. After that, we need to set the camera aspect to 16 by 9 by selecting this drop-down and simply choosing it from the list. Now we have to save the scene from the File taskbar in the top left and choose Save Scene As, call it Test Scene, and make sure you go into the Scenes folder we just made to save it. Now that's done, all we have to do is move the animation and animator windows into our layout. Let's go to the Window taskbar and choose Animation. That opens up this window that we can now grab the top tab and drag down next to the Game panel. We can go up and select the Animator window and drag that next to the Scene panel. Done and done. Now for the good stuff. Starting off here, we're going to go ahead and delete everything currently in the scene other than the camera. We can right-click and choose to delete the cube like this. Now, GameObjects. GameObjects is the term that Unity uses for every object inside your game. Makes sense, right? Everything from characters to cars to lights to cameras to special effects is a GameObject. Let's create an empty GameObject by clicking Create in the hierarchy and choose Create Empty. This is the most basic representation of a GameObject. Let's make sure we have it selected in the hierarchy and look over at the inspector table on the right. You'll see that there's one thing that shows up in here, and it's called a transform. There's one requirement to every object in your game, and it's that the computer knows where it's going to be. The transform is the location in 3D space, with 3 different values, X, Y, and Z, for the position, rotation, and scale. Let's go ahead and make sure that all of these are set to 0 except for the scale, and we can do that easily by left-clicking the gear icon in the top right and choosing to reset the transform. Let's look at this in our 3D editor window to get a better idea about what a game object is. We're looking at the transform in 3D space. This is simply a point. There is no art component or anything else to deal with. We can go ahead and change the position by typing in new values for these on the inspector. Let's do 1 in the X, -1 in the Y, and 1.1 in the Z. We can see that the point has moved in 3D space. Now let's go into the other default shapes Unity has for us. Let's go to the Create menu again, go to 3D Object, and choose the cube. When we look over at the inspector for this, it has more components. And it's important to remember that every separate thing in this inspector is called a component. This cube has a transform component, a mesh filter component, which tells the engine what the cube looks like, a box collider component for physics interactions, and finally a mesh renderer, which gives more specifics on what our cube will look like. These are the basics of game objects, and in most games you probably won't use any of these unless you're making something with very basic programmer art. So let's set up a simple scene with a showcase of game objects. We're going to go up to File and choose New Scene. Don't worry about saving this one, so we're just going to choose Don't Save, and here's a fresh one. We're going to start by making a ground plane. So let's go to Create, 3D Objects, and choose Plane. Planes are a flat, one-sided game object. They have all the same components as the cube, and we're going to drop it down a bit so it sits at the bottom of our camera view. But before we do that, let's quickly make sure the camera is set to perspective so it allows us to see depth. Let's go back to the plane and bring it down on the y-axis to -3. Now you can see it makes a nice little floor over there in the game view. But let's fix that ugly gray down there. Let's give it a quick color. In order to do that, we're going to have to make a material. Unity uses materials as what makes the game objects look pretty. They can be simple colors, which is what we're going to use for now, or have textures and normal maps to make them look rugged or bumpy, any of those nice, beautiful things you see in all those beautiful games you know and love. So let's go over to our Assets folder and make a new folder called Materials. Now let's go into that folder, right-click in it, choose Create, and come down to Material. Let's name this material Red. Right now its default color is white, and we're going to change it to red, so click the white box. Now click and drag the right bar to the top, and then click and drag on the center square to the top right. Let's go ahead and exit that window. Now there's many ways to assign this material to the plane, but the easiest for the basic shapes is to simply drag it from the project panel onto the object in our scene panel. And just like that, we have a beautiful red floor. Next, let's put a table block in here to showcase our beautiful game objects. Let's go ahead and create a cube, reset the transform, and now we're going to set the scale to 5 in the X, 1 in the Y, and 2 on the Z. Now we have what looks like a nice little table. Now, remember how we set the plane to a Y position of -3? Let's try and do the same for the table. Well, you might notice that the cube is cut in half by the floor. The transform of an object is set to indicate the center point of the game object. So in order to put this on the floor, we got to do some quick mental math with the Y scale. Since it's only 1, we know that the middle should be 1 divided by 2. So that's 0.5. So then we simply add 0.5 to the -3 location of our plane, and there we have it, -2.5, a table on the plane. But let's make this table green. Go ahead, make a new material, call it green, go into the sliders, and choose a nice green in here. Now drag it over to the table. This scene's starting to look pretty good, but let's give it a light to make it look even better. Go ahead, click Create again, go down to Light, and choose Point Light. Let's reset the transform, and already it's looking much better. Now let's do an exercise. You're going to make a museum of Unity spheres. I'm going to just give you 3 spheres to put on the left, middle, and right, and then give you colors to put on them. Now, feel free to add to this if you like. It's fun to just create the shapes, give them colors, and make a nice little environment. We're going to look into giving physics properties to these later on, but for now, we're going to go ahead and put a blue sphere on the left of the table, a purple sphere in the middle, and a yellow sphere on the right. Remember, you can add as many game objects as you like, but just make sure that you save this scene and call it Museum with a capital M in the Scenes folder. The end result should look something like this. Thank you so much for tuning in for this video, and I can't wait to see what we come up with next.